today we're going to talk about the Olympics, which is ongoing now in Tokyo. But we're not going to talk only about the Tokyo Olympics. We're going to talk about the Olympics as a sporting event. If this is an event that we should always think of as a positive thing, or if it's something that we should start considering canceling altogether. It's an event in Tokyo that started and now is costing Japan $26 billion. And almost 80% of the Japanese, just before it started, were against having this event in Tokyo for several reasons. So let's start with the talk today. Michael, why is it that the Japanese were so against having this, hosting this event?
Well, thank you, May. I think that originally a lot of Japanese were actually quite excited about this event. The polling numbers probably flipped. I mean, there was an anti-Olympics movement all along, but mostly that was concentrated essentially kind of in the far left, essentially, were the only people who were against it for a number of long-standing reasons, which I think we'll get into a little bit later in the program. But what really really the only major factor that shifted the majority or mainstream opinion was the pandemic. Obviously the games were originally scheduled to be held a year ago, but it was basically in February of 2020 when the COVID pandemic began to really take hold, both in Japan and in the world, and it made a lot of sense. People said, okay, wait, let's just do something about these Olympics now. Just is not the wrong time. So although the government sort of denied they were going to change anything for a while, eventually they came up with the idea, okay, we'll push it back 1 year. And at that time, I think the large majority of people felt, okay, great, that makes sense because certainly the pandemic's going to be over a year later. I mean, come on, let's be real. But as we have all learned, pandemics may start easily, but they can be very hard to finish. And here we are a year and a half into it, and we still really aren't sure if this is going to be with us for another year, 2 years, 5 years, or forever in one way or another. I mean, we just don't know, right? But the point is, it's dragged on a lot longer than people expected.
Yes, we cannot schedule a pandemic for sure.
No.
And we've heard about a whole host of problems, like for example, the cost that is soaring, and the original budget has been way surpassed. And all this is going to be, the burden of the taxpayers, Japanese taxpayers. But we have another issue, I think, with the corruption with IOC, because I don't know if a lot of people have followed how much IOC has been making money out of this. But you see, this is, like the IOC is not responsible for paying any of the construction costs. However, it demands a whole host of new stadiums and venues and costs and all that. And then all kinds of, requirements for the IOC executives to stay in 5-star hotels and, book, for example, in Japan, they booked all rooms of the 4 or 5-star hotels in Japan. And so we have a first-hand look at how, viciously greedy this IOC has been, behaving in the past years also. But the thing is, we also know now that they're also making money out of the rights of broadcasting rights. So again, from the broadcasting rights, we have Toyota, for example, who was a major sponsor for this event and withdrew from this kind of event. What other kinds of problems do you think, the Tokyo Olympics have been, called upon?
Yeah, well, again, this is kind of interesting because, I think that had the Olympics been held on time in 2020 without the pandemic, This is another part of history that wouldn't have been thrown into relief so clearly. While there would have been such criticism, again, it would have been essentially a minority of people on the left who were complaining about these things. Whereas I think the majority, at least here in Japan, would be saying, yeah, okay, you guys are always complaining, whatever. We just want to see our athletes and enjoy the spectacle, and let's all do it. But because what has happened this year, especially the IOC demanding that the games be held, and there's been a lot of very, very how should we say, unsavory images, like the prime minister saying, Japan doesn't have a power to cancel the games, essentially, and even to protect the lives of Japanese citizens, and all of these issues, which more or less wouldn't have been reported so extensively and wouldn't have been understood so extensively, have really been thrown into sharp relief by the delay from the year-long delay and the holding of the Olympics under these pandemic conditions, and the arrogance and the disregard for public opinion, which has been shown by the IOC board members, has really turned public opinion. Thomas Bach, had the Olympics been held a year ago, you would have been seen as some, basic foreign dignitary who nobody really cared about, but he seemed to be doing a good job. But now he's become this really hate figure, I think, among the majority of the Japanese public. They despise him.
And I think we also have all sorts of problems. Like we heard about how Rio de Janeiro's venues, most of them have been abandoned, useless, now, obsolete, about, for it's not, because it wasn't really made for the public or the benefit of the public after the Olympics. So I'm sure that this is a problem that any host country will face. And we also have technical issues in Japan. For example, it's causing environmental problems. Creating these venues is causing some green areas to be absolutely removed to create these venues. And then you have, for example, the water quality where the triathlon is going to be held, and it's said to be very polluted, and there's fears for the athletes of catching E. coli, or even the temperature. I think there is a huge problem that Tokyo Olympics was not even postponed as in season, because it was postponed in the 1964 Olympics, as it was known to be too hot for and even the locals to spend the time in the outdoors. So now we have sports, so sports activities being held in July and August, which are the hottest times in Japan. And the 1964 Olympics was moved to October, but this time it wasn't. So we had the marathon that had to be moved to the north of Japan, the Sapporo area. And finally, I think we think of all the, it's just like, for example, the fear of radiation for some events that were going to happen. So from moving ahead from here, how much do you think is the loss for Japan out of this Olympics?
Well, it's hard to say exactly, what the figures are going to be. And in fact, I think that, there will probably always be some doubt about that, because it really depends on which budgets you consider to be Olympic budgets and which ones, you would put in kind of other general development accounts. So, even from a point of view of, doing the accounting, I think that it's not always clear how things should be categorized. But you mentioned a lot of the factors you just mentioned are not really the unique factors to Japan. These are the problems which have been developing, for the entire Olympics movement. This whole idea of, every 4 years having a different city host these events. You mentioned Rio de Janeiro. We've all seen, I think, pictures of the former venues from 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I guess, which are now dilapidated and unused, and the local governments don't have money to maintain them, and they're just, it's just a waste. And this has now become common with each Olympics. Every Olympics basically goes over budget. It creates facilities which are not needed, and which, and money that should probably be better spent elsewhere. There's often cases of, homeless people being, pushed out of the areas where they lived, or poor people, redevelopment essentially, which is concentrating wealth into the hands of fewer people. These are sort of the long-term issues of the Olympics movement. The militarization of police services. Every time one of these events now happens, essentially power gets concentrated in the societies and in the cities where the Olympics are held. And this is what the long-term critics of the Olympics movement have been pointing out. But I think now, in the case of this Tokyo one, this sort of leftist critique of the Olympics has now become much more mainstream, and much more, has really risen into the consciousness of anybody who was paying attention.
Yes, and to add to that point, for example, we have the issue of nationalism, and what the previous Prime Minister Abe was saying, that, if you're not supporting the Olympics, you're not loyal or patriotic enough to Japan. So it's like even taken a political position, like if you're with the Olympics or you're not with the Olympics, then you're not Japanese enough. And then you have the bigger problem, which is, with the technology development, and, coinciding with the coronavirus, they have developed an application that will monitor everyone. And from there, now we're having applications that will monitor any foreigner in Japan, and, kind of give the right, quote unquote, for Japanese to kind of download this application, where they could just, monitor and maybe, call the police on any foreigner they, quote unquote, they have doubt about. So it's getting more and more like, touching into the human rights part, also, trying to, limit the person's liberties and freedoms through these kinds of, necessary, quote unquote, processes in the Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's become, at least as it's evolved, the Olympics movement is kind of, maybe even in an exaggerated form, showing all of the problems of sort of the neoliberal order that we have today, where essentially, this new billionaire society, where wealth and power is being concentrated into a global elite at the expense of the rights and the dignity and even the wealth of ordinary people. And so, it's really kind of an institution which is clearly out of control, and it's not really in the public interest in the way that it functions. And another thing we can mention is that the athletes themselves, because of the so-called Olympic spirit, make no money whatsoever for their performance. They do get medals if they do well, but they're not paid for their for their appearance in the Olympics. All of that money essentially goes up to the elite. If they get injured or sick, essentially the Olympics organizers are saying it's your responsibility, it's your liability, not ours. So it's really kind of become this, at least in the way that it's governed, in the way that it functions, a really, really nasty organization.
Indeed, because, for example, you have all these volunteers. I think there are in total, in number of staff, there are 8,000, and additional, number of volunteers. most of these people are not paid even for their services, but the money that's made essentially goes to the IOC and their executives, and the money spent on them, of course. So I think more and more countries are not very, are reluctant to host this event in their cities. And the big sign of this is because of the public referendum that is, an obligatory for any city to push for their, bidding. You have 3 out of the 5 cities that were bidding for the 2024 Olympics have withdrawn their bids. Budapest, Hamburg, and Rome, these withdrew. The 2 remaining were Paris and Los Angeles. And so they decided to divide the remaining 2 to give to 2024 to Paris and 2028 to Los Angeles. And this shows you how less and less cities are actually willing to host this expensive, corrupt event. Even though I feel sad for the sport, the athletes and the sport itself, because these people are like really working hard on their skills and honing their, abilities, and spending so much of their time and energy to achieve some victory at this event. And so we should find a way, I guess, so that, let's say, the money made out of these events go to the public use of, let's say, sports or schools or education, where the profit is going back to the community that it hosted. In that case, this event might be useful or meaningful, but otherwise it is just a greedy executive business that's just using the athletes and the host city. Now, there is really the other point is, for example, with the pandemic this time, it was also unfair for the athletes, because some countries had stricter regulations within their countries, so the athletes had less chance to train and prepare for the Olympics, whereas other athletes were given a bigger leverage for training and preparing for the Olympics. So you have this, also different abilities and different chances for these athletes who are now coming to Japan to compete in real time for the first time. So, there should be a level of fairness, I guess, going ahead, if this event is really going to be encouraged to go ahead in the first place. But I think there is a way we should start thinking about fairness when we're, allowing these competitions to take part or to take hold, and it's a global competition. So if you want to have a global competition, then it should be with a global start, where people have the same kind of chances to compete in the same sports.
Well, bringing together what you said before, about where should the profits or the revenues of the Olympics go, one thing that would make a lot of sense to me is, how about using those profits and those revenues to enhance sort of sports facilities and sports opportunities for people in the developing world. That also has the idea of fairness, right? So the Olympics really could become a time that unites the world and helps the poorer countries, improve themselves, or at least to lessen the gap between them and the richer countries. So it could be an opportunity for us to advance the cause of justice, rather than to have these wider neoliberal gaps with these corporate overlords who strut the stage and give 13-minute speeches, right?
Exactly. And we could also talk about the history of this event. It's always been, in a way, used and abused, today economically and financially, but previously politically even. I mean, like when, after it started in 1896, we had 2 times where the Olympic was canceled completely, no, 3 times, I guess. But these were all because of the war. But then you had in the 1980 Olympics of Moscow, you had a large scale boycotting of the event. And this was also a political act. So, you know, even though the Olympic organizers always try to tell you that this is not a political thing, and are, you know, like for example, Japan are trying to, officially at least, you know, trying to, you know, to quiet down, let's say, Naomi Osaka's political statements, you know, when, because she's quite vocal about racism and, you know, all these things. So, you know, it's a way of actually having not denying that it's a political. Let's look at right in the face and, you know, tackle the political issues. I mean, they have a refugee team on their teams for 2 years now. And this year, you know, the Syrian refugee attendees, refugee athletes, were 9 people, bigger than the original, you know, state attendees or the athletes, which were 6. So there is politics in a way there again. So let's not deny politics, but instead, if you think it should be completely neutral, it should be, but you know, not to hide behind banners of, you know, slogans like stronger, higher, faster, and now together. This is an added slogan to the Olympics. But let's also, you know, admit that, you know, we are a political gang here, trying to make money out of the host countries. If they're not going to admit it, at least it should be more open and publicly known, I think.
Sure. I mean, you know, basically everything is politics, you know, is part of my own view of things. I mean, everything is about power relationships and promoting of some kind of view. I think that what the, you know, when they talk about a ban on politics, so-called, what they're really saying is that we're banning any politics that aren't our executive overlord politics.
Exactly.
You know, politics which comes from the ground up, that's what they want to ban. But you know, on the other hand, I did see that, for example, some of the British teams took one knee, you know, during some of the matches to kind of you know, to protest racism and to promote, I believe, the, you know, Black Lives Matter movement. So, you know, I think that this wall is being broken down. But yes, I mean, you know, the ban on politics means let us, the executives, control all the politics, and you, you know, the ordinary people, the athletes, the workers, you don't get to have your own independent politics.
So it's also good to know that as part of the Olympic history, that for example, the now famous Olympic flame relay was started by the Nazis in their Olympics in 1936. And it was a way to showcase Nazism and their propaganda to the world. And, you know, it was a world that was trying to almost, again, boycott this Olympic, but they didn't for financial business reasons. So sportsmen boycotted it on a personal level, but the countries, nations didn't boycott at the time. So it's good to know that even those, you know, things that we now think of as a nice starting event for the Olympics, the flame and relay, was started by a Nazi's propaganda regime.
Yeah, it's a you know, it's a part of history that obviously they don't like to promote very much. They don't like to put that, you know, oh, you see that water, you know, that sacred flame, guess where that came from.
Tokyo has had a whole host of scandals coming to this event. Some of them were like completely manageable, or, you know, it's just a problem of vetting, how people were vetted for the posts that they were given. Some people known for bullying were, you know, publicly claiming that they have bullied people, were on the committee, on the director's team. Some people who made jokes about the Holocaust were also on the team. And you have the scandal of the emblem, which was probably plagiarized from a Belgian artist. How do you think this is going to be, managed in the future, not just for the Olympics, but, for all events in Japan? Because I'm sure that the selections were, or the vetting for the people who were selected was quite politically, motivated selections. Or do you agree with this at all?
Obviously, I think that a lot of this, to get away from the IOC and the IOC's problems, which I think we've already covered a lot of, it also has really highlighted problems in Japanese society and Japanese management. I actually wrote recently something like, the 1964 Olympics allowed Japan to showcase its recovery from the war and its modernization, its rapid modernization. But the 2020 Olympics has really highlighted that Japan's, the problems of being a one-party state for so long, the problems of a society which has failed to keep up with kind of the social norms of much of the rest of the world. I mean, this is a country with that among rich countries has one of the worst gender equality balances among them. I mean, females in Japanese society are like a pathetic, like 9% of managers. I mean, there's different, different measurements, but the point is that, a lot of the areas in which Japan has really fallen behind and failed to keep up with the 21st century has really been put on global display here in a way that that's been embarrassing to the nation. I mean, Japanese are a proud people. And it's mostly the government which has been failing. The Japanese people have been appalled at a lot of what they have seen. And looking at the local scene, I mean, there is going to be a national election in a couple of months, and so there is the potential, unfortunately, not really of the government falling, but of them not doing as well as they might. And it could end up with the prime minister having to leave, but Japan is it's really highlighted many of the weaknesses of Japanese politics and the Japanese polity and the societies. Like I said, it's not really functioning according to the Olympic spirit and the values which it's supposed to be according to the agreements which have been signed.
Yeah, I think probably the only good thing about this Olympic was that it was for the first time hosting almost 50% of female athletes, 48.9%, which is it's almost 50%. So I guess this should be an encouragement even to Japan to start really, thinking about from bottom up, people's interests first, thinking more of females as, as valuable assets in society as much as the males. And hoping that, even the IOC's corruption will be more and more exposed and perhaps limited and even removed from organizing such an event, or at least evolve or forced to evolve and change its ways.
To stop you there, I really think this is a turning point because, I think that, like I said, a lot of things that were more or less the opinion of a minority have now come into, majority consciousness. People are now understanding there's a problem with the Olympics. And I think that going forward, there's going to be more protests against it at future venues. There's going to be more scrutiny of it by the media, and I think that this pressure is going to build, and that, we are going to see some kind of reform to the movement, maybe not as far as you or I might want it to go, but I do think that, people are going to look back at this event and say, it reached kind of a peak of outrageousn's in 2021. And then after that, some changes came in. I mean, there is a debate, again, especially on the left, which says, we don't want to cancel the Olympics, we want to abolish them. get rid of them. They
Mm.
need to be completely destroyed. And I certainly understand where that point of view is coming from. But, I also think that there is kind of a baby in the bathwater there. I mean, people do enjoy watching the games. It is good for the athletes. I mean, to be, for the people who are, win the medals, for all of their lives, that those medals stay on their mantelpiece and say, hey, look, when I was 25, I won the gold medal in sprinting or whatever, right? So the point is that, there is a good side to the Olympic movement, which has now been terribly abused and manipulated. But the reason that they can continue to do it is because there is this positive side. So, I'm not one who actually believes that the Olympics should be abolished. I think that's a little bit of a, how should we say, an exaggerated response. But there needs to be a root and branch reform of the movement. And to be honest, my opinion as it's developed is that they should go back to Greece and stay there. Every 4 years, there should be permanent facilities built in Greece, the home of the Olympics. And, those same facilities that are built now can be used in 4 years and 8 years and 12 years without, putting these burdens on cities around the world. And, and as you also mentioned there, reform the governance in a way that brings the benefits more to ordinary people and less to these guys in the five-star hotels.
businesses.
That's right. Those guys need to
Exactly.
be those guys need to be out on the street, and the people out
Exactly.
the people out on the street need to be getting benefit from
Eh,
these Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, like it could be like we could have several permanent locations. For example, you could divide sports into locations in the Olympics. For example, you could have the track and field events held in permanent, let's say, location in certain countries, other sports held in other areas. For example, the golf. I mean, like the golf field that was created in Brazil, no one plays, or very little people play golf in Brazil. But if you have golf, very nice golf fields in other cities, you could use those for Olympics and use other facilities in other countries for other sports. And this way you could distribute the benefit and the fun and the spectator and the tourism to all the countries around the world. And then you can have the opening and the closing ceremony in, let's say Greece. And with the condition that, let's say, the broadcasting and all the business benefit that, from sponsorship and all this go back to public revenue where it is used in specifically welfare and education. This way it would be meaningful, but otherwise it is really becoming, it's really becoming a pain, for any country that's going to host it. The only country that has been, has not lost from hosting this kind of event is Los Angeles, and that's because they benefited from the broadcasting revenue, and that's where the IOC started to eye the broadcasting revenue.
Well, let me just react to that, which I think you're right that, I mean, we are in a global world right now, and the TV cameras could be set up anywhere in the world. We could all be seeing this together in one package, even though the swimmers could be in Iceland and the runners could be in Greece and the rowers could be in South Africa, right? None of that makes any difference in today's world because we can bring it together, through the globalized media.
So today we talked about the Olympics, which was an event that started with an all-male sporting event. We have come a long way today, with almost 50% of the athletes being females. However, we've seen that there are a lot of problems that accompanies the event, and a lot of harm and loss for the host countries. So perhaps this Tokyo event should be a good occasion for everyone to start thinking about the Olympics, and if they're going to host it, what better ways to have the Olympics in their cities. So I hope to see you in the next episode.